Today is Tuesday, July 19th, and you're listening to the Beer Temple Podcast.
Remember this is what we wanted. Remember this is what we said. To never be heard or seen from again. Remember this is what we wanted. Remember this is what we said. To never be heard or seen from again.
Hello, welcome to the Beer Temple Podcast and another one of the smoothest fades I have ever heard, courtesy of the Fade Master himself, Serge. I'm your host for today. I'm Mike Shalau from Is Was Brewing, and if it's just me, we're doing a beer that changed my life, which I'm very excited about. We'll get to that in a second, but first, let me thank all of the listeners in WLPN for having us on. Had a raucous show down in Bridgeport. Which is probably 2 or 3 episodes ago now that we've recorded one in the can. But it was fun being back there, getting the hottest of takes, which, when you do it live, you expect people to be a little bit more restrained, but then you put Edmar in the show and everything gets up to his level. But yeah, today we got a beer that changed my life episode. And I usually write out these intros by longhand, few edits, few different drafts, but I forgot my notebook at home, so I'll see if I can wing this one from the top. Today's guest was born and raised in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He graduated from the University of Richmond, go Spiders, with degrees in accounting and economics. After that, he worked in the public and forensic accounting segment for a few years before joining the Reyes Group, which is it's the parent company of the largest beer distributor network in the country. While he was there, he built out the internal audit team before being recruited to Revolution Brewing as their CFO in 2016. Also, while he was at Reyes, he grew out his Instagram following. He was the CFO of Revolution, and that has grown into Chief Strategic Officer, where he oversees financials, strategy, and marketing. He is one of the most interesting combinations of analytical and creative thinking I have ever seen in the beer industry, and someone I'm lucky to get to call my friend. He has over 25,000 followers on Instagram and 850,000 likes on TikTok as Beer Aficionado. He has won 2 awards from the North American Beer Writers Guild for Beer Crunchers, his long-form, data-driven blog. And probably most impressively, he has raised over $177,000 for Lurie Children's Hospital as himself. Everyone, Doug Veliky.
Wow. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you for coming on. I like to gas people up to start these out.
Yeah, man.
All that was accurate, right?
That was perfect.
All right. I think that was how I had it written out, too. I was a little nervous there to get some of those dates or numbers correct.
Well done.
How you been?
Pretty good.
Yeah.
Interesting times.
Mm-hmm.
I probably talked about this last time I was on the show, but trying to get better about being 6 months ahead. We're already planning for 2023. Trying to get better about that because I feel like we're at a point in craft beer where we need to raise our games.
I found my notebook, by the way, actually.
Yeah, we need to raise our games.
Yeah.
It's getting harder out there,
Yep.
So we need to be even better at what we do. No matter how good we think we are, we all need to get a little bit better. So trying to stay in that mindset and be as far ahead as we can.
I mean, somewhat surprisingly, I run a brewery that's going to be about 100 barrels a year, but I'm already scheduled out through the beginning of 2023 as well for our releases.
That's awesome. Hey, Cantillon only make like 150 barrels a year?
I don't know.
I believe that's
So my goal is to pass them.
Yeah.
In esteem and barrelage. Doug, so as the show is called, will you tell me about a beer or many beers over the course of our conversation that changed your life?
Sure. Just interrupt me because I got like a little bit of a journey toward the true beer that changed my life. But like you said, I grew up in Pittsburgh, and I wasn't much of a partier in high school. I was more of like get together in the friend's basement and play GoldenEye.
Same.
So, but by senior year is when there were parties where there'd be some beer here and there. Again, didn't have a big partying group of friends. to that extent, but we started to like toward the end of our senior year. And so going to a party for me just meant like taking 2 of my dad's beers with me. And my dad didn't drink a lot of beer, but we would host Thanksgiving and Christmas, and I had a typical mom who would buy a case or 2 of good beer, stick it in the garage, and it'd probably be there for the holiday next year as well. But Penn Pilsner was like my first craft beer, and that was would have been in like the year 2000, 1999 or 2000. And it's still there today. There's still a Penn Brewery bar in the airport where you can try their beers. Last time I was in Pittsburgh, I had a pint of Penn Pilsner. So
did it taste the same as when you were 18?
I don't know if I knew
fresher.
what I was tasting back then, but yeah, it was exactly as I remembered it. But that was the beer I started stealing, but just because my dad would prefer when he had his, he probably had like 10 beers a year, something like that. But when he had one, he wanted it to be a Sam Seasonal or whatever the best thing available was, like a local Penn Pilsner. So that's what we would buy.
Was he just not a big drinker at all, or was he just not a beer drinker?
Not a beer, or not. I'm sorry, not a drinker at all.
Gotcha.
Wine. My parents drink wine at dinner for
classy
holidays,
individuals.
but yeah, nothing too crazy. And so when I went to college, then I just had that wanting to enjoying a little more flavor than the Natty Light or the Beast that my friends would be drinking. Like I had these just 2 bottles that I would sling around. That'd be like my party.
Nice.
But in college, went like you said, Richmond, Virginia, very similar beer options as we had in Pittsburgh. Yes, go Spiders. And the 2 beers that I gravitated towards, which were also at the time Pennsylvania beers, were Yingling and Rolling Rock. So for about $8 or $9, this is now 2000 to 2004 when I was in college, I just was always in the mindset of I'd rather have 12 Yinglings or Rolling Rocks than 24 Beasts or Natty Lights. And that's pretty much what the price was. You got one instead of 2.
Nice.
And so that's kind of what I would just buy when we'd have a party for myself. In college, you kind of just buy for yourself, or you and your roommate split something. So I just kind of found a group of guys that kind of were the same way. And I remember on my freshman year in college, found these 5 other guys that were the same way. We would Shiner Bock, Shiner Hefeweizen were other ones that were available then and available in Richmond. And one night and this is the year 2000, so this is kind of ahead of its time. We had something we called International Beer Night. Nice. And that was like the friend's older brother who would get us beer. We asked him, we gave him his money to go to the Food Lion and get us these 6 six-packs, and we found 6 six-packs from 6 different countries. Now, these were Corona, Heineken, Grolsch.
Stella, maybe.
I think it was Stella.
Got a Belgium in there, right?
Killian's Irish Red was definitely one, and I can't remember the others. It might come back to me at some
Boddington,
point.
Some English thing or something.
So we'd of course break it up. We had 6 different countries. We might have even bought little flags or something
That's awesome.
And, read about them and just had we were still partying. We would probably go to a frat party right after that. Yeah. So it wasn't total wine and cheese type of night. It was this was just what we did. And I found these other guys that thought this was fun too, of just drink a little bit less, but higher quality, more flavor. So that was just something that got started with me early before I knew about craft beer and microbrews.
And until American craft beer really took off and craft breweries were able to kind of directly tell their story, that really was the American higher end beer story, right? Was the beers of the world, or the Michael Jackson best great beers of Belgium kind of thing. That was what that energy went into. Yeah, because you can just go to your local brewery really for most people.
Totally. And I've learned since that there was magical things happening at this time in California and in San Diego. I'd never been to California at that point. I've now since been there a lot, but
you don't have social media.
No.
So you can't just open up an app and be oh, they're doing this out there. You're oh, that wasn't long after the time people would bring back Coors from the Rockies because it was so novel and so weird that they were making all this beer out there. But
our degree of caring was just eyeballing it on the shelf and saying, that looks unique enough. I want these ones because they look different. Yeah. They look a little more special. They look like they have more flavor than this giant cube.
Did you guys have favorites from around the world? Were there ones that you or did you only do that once, or was that just a...
Killian's was a big favorite on my dorm room hall freshman year. I remember we strongly disliked Grolsch. I remember we had, that was because it has a name that's ugh.
Gross.
So that was a running joke the rest of the year, and we never bought Grolsch again.
You probably thought the bottles were getting something in them because the pop tops were in there.
Green bottles.
Yeah. Yeah, so you're drinking beers of the world. And
Yeah. So leave college, and first job is in Washington, D.C. I actually lived in Arlington, Virginia, and get an apartment with a buddy from Richmond, and then my best friend from growing up, who he went to Wake Forest, but also got a job in D.C. So the three of us got an apartment together. By luck of the draw, we lived one block from this incredible beer bar. It's like the most, it no longer exists, sadly. It's was like the most legendary beer bar in Virginia. It would have been like the Toronado of Virginia at the time. It was called Dr. Dremo's. And you went in and it looked like a funky 70s, like weird carpeting, aquariums that looked like they hadn't been cleaned in 20 years, but like fish were somehow swimming in them. And then they had like 40 beers on tap, and this is 2004 now. And we would go there all the time, and that's where I would drink stuff like Shiner Hefeweizen was our favorite beer. We would, when it was someone's birthday, we would literally get a keg of Shiner Hefeweizen back then. And we went to this place, and there were some like teeny tiny microbrews that I do not know the names of them. I'm sure they don't exist right now, but I remember they'd put beers on. Like one day there was a beer called Chocolate Stout. And at the time, I had never heard of a chocolate stout. I'd never seen chocolate associated with a beer before. And I was like, well, that sounds amazing.
Yeah.
I got to have that.
The OG pastry stout.
Exactly. And then another time we come in.
And you flipped that sample for other, or your flat brim flipped the sample.
With my sushi soy sauce container.
Yeah. Sorry.
The next time we go in, next to the chocolate donut, or next to the chocolate stout, is a beer called donut beer. I have no idea what donut beer was at the time, but there was donut beer, and I had that, and I loved it, and it reminded me of a donut.
Was that Rogue?
I don't think so. Okay. I think it was this tiny garage brewery that existed in 2004 in Virginia.
So we didn't invent the pastry stout in 2015.
So the third time we go back to this place, there's a beer on tap with the same logo of the brewery, and it said chocolate donut beer. And so I asked the bartender about it. I said, chocolate donut beer? Because we had gotten to know this guy a little bit. And he goes, oh, yeah, we were just down to the last like little bit of each keg, so we just combined them and called it chocolate donut beer. And
awesome.
My mind at the time was just like blown, and I was like, well, fill her up.
Yeah.
You know? And I loved it.
Boss
and I don't know
please.
if I actually liked it because my standards were very low back then. I liked everything. I just thought everything was like mind-blowing.
Which is not a bad thing, right? That's a great place to be.
Yes. So that just kind of like, we just combined these two things and made this. It seemed logical. It was fun, and we did it. And so that again is like the snowball in my head starting to build of like, this is awesome.
Yeah.
And then they eventually demolish it for condo buildings. Rest in peace, Dr. Dremo's. And
Pour some out.
Soon after that, it was 2006, I moved to Chicago. Just didn't like DC as a like place career-wise, the type companies to work for. I got kind of pigeonholed into government work. Wanted to try a new city. I probably wasn't going to like whatever city I started in. I was going to if I started in Chicago, I probably would have moved somewhere else. Sure. But just that point in my life, I was 24, moved to Chicago on a complete whim. My sister did live here. So I moved here in late 2006, basically early 2007. And that's when like I would call like the height of Blue Moon. Mm-hmm. And so when I tried my first Blue Moon around that time, I was just like, oh my God, this is like amazing stuff. So there's probably like a year in my history where if you saw me out, I'd have the big tall glass with the orange slice in it and just was living the good life that's of great. Forensic accountant, drinking way too many Blue Moons on the weekend.
Awesome.
And then that thankfully led me to the discovery of Gumball Head shortly after that, once I decided to figure out how I could trade up and get to know what some of these wacky beers that Chicago had to offer.
There's a previous beer that changed my life from someone on the podcast too.
I recall that. Yeah, I think I think he threw in the Rolling Rock and Yingling in his build up as well. So let's see. So Gumball Head was like my early Chicago land craft beer that got me like interested, and of course the artwork made you naturally want to try all their other beers, and so I would try Robert the Bruce and of course Zombie Dust if you could ever find a bottle, which was rare.
Never heard of it.
And then that led, by this point we're close to when Half Acre opened their doors, and I remember in their somewhere in their first year doing a tour of Lincoln as soon as they opened up that location, doing a tour there, trying the Gossamer Over Ale. those like not quite being my type, like they're still like awesome memories of mine, but it was like Daisy Cutter was a big one.
When the India Brown Ale was an ascended style.
And then during this time of living here, and in the early days of living here, I had to travel for my job to the West Coast all the time. So my first client was in Phoenix, Arizona, and that's where I met my now wife. We were both commuting out there, her from San Francisco, me from Chicago, of course. So we like dated long distance. I was always going to either Silicon Valley, Seattle for different spurts of like 3 to 6 months. So it was easy for us to date long distance, but I would always end up like visiting her for the weekend in San Francisco. So what we would do is then go to wine country a lot on like a Saturday. There'd be, we'd just like rent a car and drive up for the day, and got really into wine. And that's where I stumbled upon Russian River, knowing nothing of its, reputation, but just like kind of, I wonder if there's any breweries around here when we're up doing wine tours.
Is that really how it was? Like
Yeah.
you didn't know about it before you found it like that, or
Right. I went really far liking beer without ever caring enough to look on the internet for beer. So
What year is this where you find it?
when I'm in
When you're in wine country and you'd stumble upon
2010, 2009, 2010, something like that.
and you knew of the internet and you love beer.
Yeah,
You
but
had to
this
put
would
them
have been
together. Love it.
been like open up Google Maps, type brewery while in Napa Valley and see where the pin drops.
That's awesome.
Oh, we're near a place called Russian River. So
Amazing.
that's how I found that, of us just like going there for pizza. Later, getting into beer and realizing, oh, I've been there. Oh, this place is very well known,
Yeah.
especially come 2013. Anyway, I try a beer there called Temptation. Absolutely blew my mind. I remember being extremely like sweaty, like something with like no air conditioning in the car, something like that. I remember we were in the car a long time and showing up there being hot, going in, having no idea what that was, and just ordering it. No idea I'm probably ordering a Chardonnay barrel-aged wild ale,
Yeah.
not knowing what that was, trying it, and just the sourness, like being a Sour Patch Kid kind of eater as a kid, and that kind of flavor just I always loved, but never knew of it as a thing with beer. Ordered that one there and absolutely blew my mind. Of course, tried the other ones like Supplication and I think Consecration. I don't remember if this was that trip because we ended up going back many, many times, and now I go with my now father-in-law all the time. So Russian River has a special place in my heart and turned me on to sour beers. But it was 2013 now. I'm like kind of skipping years, but bear with me
okay.
here. 2013 is when I decided to start an Instagram account because I worked at this company that distributed beer. When I started there, which was '09, craft beer, especially locally in Chicago, was not really a thing. And then as each year went by, it started to become a thing, and then it very quickly became a thing that they saw the importance of. Reyes, where I worked, they were very early. They were the first people to knock on Half Acre's door, knock on Revolution's door, and say, "We'd love to, bring your beer to market." And so those beers started showing up in the work fridges and the work happy hours at Reyes out in Rosemont, where I worked. So that quickly turned me on to that, and that made me want to work on the beer side of the company. I was at this like holding company level, like very like corporate finance, kind of helped out all the businesses. They do McDonald's distribution, they did broadline food distribution, then they had this other segment that was the beer distribution.
Massive company, right? It's like the sixth largest privately owned company in the country.
Yeah, it's probably a $30-something billion.
And you went there just because it was a really good job, not because they had the beer portfolio, or was there a little bit of the beer thing was like?
I was looking for a job at the worst possible time, which was during the financial collapse
2009 or whatever.
of January 2009.
Yeah.
And they were the one company hiring, and they were hiring for a good reason because they were in very, they had a savvy business model. They were in very recession-proof industries of McDonald's
And beer. Yeah.
People might shift which kind of beer they're buying, but they're probably still buying beer.
It's
if
probably
they're a
coming
beer
on one of
fan.
their trucks.
And that's why when you're in the distribution world, diversification is so important. So, might swing one way or the other in your portfolio, but you want to have a little something for everybody that you're representing. Mm-hmm. So as it became a bigger part of what I wanted to do, I didn't see a path based on what my skill set was, what I was doing at the company. I didn't see like looking around these beer companies because, again, they're distribution. They have only a particular number of positions at these companies. And I didn't see like anything that like was a logical, oh, if that guy quits and moves on, I want to apply for his job. There wasn't anything that was like a direct fit. And I was like, what these guys do is interesting, but I have no experience in what they're doing. And I didn't see the fit. So I was just kind of had the mindset of, I got to learn more about beer, first of all. Like I'm getting good at understanding their operations, and I knew every little thing with every forklift. When you scanned this, I knew how it reacted to their system, and everything that rolled up into their financial statements, I knew how all that worked. But what happened out on the streets, let's say, that part had nothing to do with what my job was, and I was completely blind to it. And just as a tasting beer, I didn't consider myself the slightest bit of an expert. I've still, to this day, never brewed a beer in my life. So there was a lot of like gaps missing of someone who was dying to, who figured out over this time that they were dying to get into beer. So that's when I started an Instagram account, which was in 2013. And I was like, I'm just going to start. I think I saw one other person that just like hit my, I don't even know if they had an Explore feed back then, but somehow stumbled upon a woman in California's account, and it was just all beer stuff. And I was like, oh, yeah, because I had this one that was just pictures of me and my wife, and like a blurry sunset or something like that. Like everybody's
an Instagram account.
Yeah, a 2012
with
Instagram
like Pro
account.
X-1 filter put on it.
I had one of those, and that was about it. And I was like, oh, I could have a different one that's just beer stuff. And so I have all these pictures still in there if anyone wanted to spend 2 hours scrolling, but there's just a lot of, there's a picture of me at the map room with some random beer that was around back then.
So you started as just lagers.
Yeah, pretty much. So go ahead.
What year was this again?
2013.
2013. So Instagram's only about 2 or 3 years old at this point, right? Maybe.
Probably
less.
Two. I'd say two, yeah.
Most people who have a job that, is a good job, but they want to get more into beer, start home brewing. Was that ever something you thought about doing? And then how did it come like I should do Instagram just because you saw there was only one person doing it? Or?
Maybe if I had a home brewing friend, a friend who home brews, maybe that would have made me want to get into it. But I didn't have anything pulling me in that direction.
I think you made the right choice, to be perfectly, just to qualify what I was saying earlier. Right?
Well, I mean, it's just, I was so in the weeds and the nuts and bolts of the distribution side that brewing was like pretty much the farthest thing from it.
Yeah, sure.
So I don't know. I guess I just started clinging to like the next things. I would go to Capone's when Freddie owned it, and I would just sit there. I'd sometimes bring like a brewery stout that I had nobody else to drink it with, and I'd like bring a stout to Capone's and talk to Freddie, and I would just ask him a million questions like, why do you think what do people say that, and I just tried to figure out, and he would just talk my ear off.
Yeah.
And we talked about the consumer, why people like these, what are people saying who pick up this?
Yeah.
And he loved this stuff too, and we would just talk forever and ever, and I still talk to Freddie almost daily to this point. And we just had so much fun dissecting what breweries were doing, why they were doing it, and what consumers were saying about it.
That's awesome. In doing research to write your little intro, I found a picture of you that he either posted on his personal Facebook or on the Capone's Facebook, and it's you drinking. It's like a black and white photo of you drinking beer in like the snow, and it's like Doug is the best, and this like soliloquy about how awesome you are from like 2014 or something like that.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I think we both had a very good influence on each other.
Oh, that's awesome.
Over the years.
And you had a passion, or you had an interest in photography, I guess, is part of that reason?
My wife had a side business where she was just trying to get into photography and doing photo shoots for families where she didn't have a studio or anything. She would meet them in like Lincoln Park and get a lot of the, famous Chicago angles that happen from Lincoln Park. So she did that. She eventually invested in some nicer cameras, and that's where I kind of quickly realized, it doesn't take much to stand out on Instagram. All I have to do is take a nicer photo and it'll grab people's attention, and then maybe they'll be more interested in reading what I have to say once I figure out something to say, which took a while.
Sure.
But I used kind of photos as the kind of conversation starter or attention grabber to an Instagram post, because most posts were pretty poor quality at the time. So a DSLR shot that had a little thought put into it could jump out.
I'm sure you will be too humble to accept this, but I think that you probably had a huge influence on a lot of breweries and their marketing before you entered the brewery space as a marketing or person. Like the fact that you were so much better at taking pictures of the beers that these breweries were making, at least locally, you drove a lot of that like, oh, this is a useful tool, the Instagram thing. 'Cause when I started at Pipeworks, they had Facebook. That was how you communicated. The Instagram, they had one, but it was run by an employee and it had shirtless pictures of him on it. And then they had barely had a Twitter, and so you were one of the first people we saw taking like really good photos of things and like making things look enticing, not just like, here's the thing we made this week, go get it. Like, it's actually like, oh, this guy's putting thought into this and he's putting technique into it. And I don't know if most breweries ever get to how good you've gotten at it, but I'm sure it was inspirational for much more than just Pipeworks. So.
Well, I appreciate that, but like a lot of the breweries are the reason I kept doing it.
Good feedback.
I can give Pipeworks pretty much credit for being number 2, but number 1, funny enough, was Lagunitas. It all kind of started. It wasn't my first pitcher, but it was the first pitcher that like kind of had a theme to it. I was drinking a beer that I'm sure no longer exists called Undercover Shutdown.
Yeah.
I was sitting out on my grill. I was actually I lived a block from the dojo. I lived at, I forget the name of the street. Anyway, 1 block north of it. And
something.
Yeah. So I was wearing the typical Ray-Ban sunglasses, like the black Tom Cruise pair. And I was looking at the beer, had some burgers on the grill, set the beer down. And I was like, oh, Undercover Shutdown. And I took my sunglasses off and just set them next to the beer. And then I took a picture of it that I was just going to do my normal Instagram post. But then I was like, I just had a little fun with the way I wrote the description of the beer about like being undercover. And then Lagunitas pretty quickly like commented back something that like went along with what I wrote. And I was like, whoa, they're like a huge brewery. That's kind of cool that they're writing. And then I wrote back to them and there was just like maybe a 3-line each back and forth. And I was just like, that's awesome. And that just them doing that made me want to do this again.
Yeah.
And so Pipeworks had some of the funnest labels to create a photo with something going on.
You did some awesome stuff.
So I had so much fun with the Pipeworks labels, and probably years before I ever actually met Kate, we had some of the funniest that I later learned that's probably, I assume, who I was talking to.
Yeah, she took over pretty quickly.
Yeah, we would have some really fun back and forths where anytime I posted, I knew that Pipeworks was going to write something equally funnier than what I wrote in response to it. And sometimes we'd have back and forths and we'd like look forward to each other's posts. And I feel like, I would never say that I inspired Pipeworks, but I feel like we were having this kind of fun moment back and forth that I don't know how many people realized it was happening, but I feel like we were, definitely had some funny, giving each other momentum for what we were doing.
That's one of the beautiful things about social media, right? Is you can have that interaction, and you probably wouldn't have walked up to someone at Pipeworks and like, look at this photo I took, and showed it on your phone or something. Mm-hmm. But the fact that we could see it and that like we could interact, or I didn't interact with the interacting, but like Kate would interact with you, and there would be that feedback loop, and you became friends in a way when these people you never met and inspired by. Yep. So, yeah, sorry, I might have derailed the trajectory of your.
No, we're in great shape here. Good. So, being on Instagram a little bit, just talking about beer, taking these kind of creative photos led to a lot of people that were most interested in this content were in Chicago or in California. And all of a sudden I felt like more than half my followers, for whatever reason, were in California. Now, I had discovered a lot of beer out in California from dating my wife long distance. By this point, she had moved to Chicago, lived together. But I loved California beers like just as much as I loved Chicago beer. So I had this like weird kind of like two sides of my brain when it came to choosing beer. And so I would develop a big following out there and follow those people, of course, in return, and see what they were drinking, what releases they were going to, what beers they were excited about. And then when we're getting to the beer that changed my life was when Lost Abbey released Duck Duck Goose in 2013. So this is just like the end of that summer. So this all happened in just a few months. They released this beer, and I come to realize that this is a blend of 3 years. It's an American wild ale, aged in wine barrels. Again, I've spent all this time like visiting wineries, not being super into wine, but it was just like a thing we did and had this connection to wine country. So when I saw, okay, this is a sour beer that has 3 different years that then get blended together, and you only release this once every 3 years. This is exciting to me. Mm-hmm. And then I realized this was the first beer I wanted, that I realized I couldn't get. It sold out before everybody had all the bottles before I even knew it existed. Then I figured out what it was. All these California folks that I followed, that's all they were talking about. And I was like, I need to try this. I got to have a bottle. And eventually I reached out to the guy who had been the nicest to me. And I think he had posted like a stunner shot of like 12 bottles or something. And I was like, hey man, I'm not trying to ask for any handouts. Is there anything like you could think of that I could hunt down for you where you would swap it for me with this? But back then there was no dollar values associated with trading. It was just you had to find something that was to a person equally as hard to get. There was no numbering system for anything.
I made one beer trade in my life. It was around this time, and it was straight up a 4-pack of Heady Topper for a 6-pack of Zombie Dust.
Zombie Dust. I like it. So this guy said, I'll tell you what, send me a label. And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, just send me a label. And he sent me the beer. And he said, we'll figure out something later. And I certainly did, but he just gave it to me. And then so all of this, my mind is being blown about like how nice people can be out there, how thoughtful they can be. There can be the competitiveness that leads to the friction and leads to feeling like everybody's a jerk out there, but it's really not the case, especially when you're in person, of course. But there's even on the internet really nice people out there. Funny story, this guy later applied for a job at Reyes. I was able to tell this story to someone. He ends up getting the job, and I think he might even still to this day, maybe like 6-7 years later, work for the company I worked for. So we end up becoming co-workers. This guy who before he had ever met me knew nothing about me. Back then, I wasn't even putting my face in pictures. It was just pictures of beer and what I would write. This guy sent me this like super fancy bottle. So then, of course, I eventually tried Duck Duck Goose. I think the first time I opened a bottle, got a Nintendo Zapper and added like ducks, photoshopped in ducks from Duck Hunt.
I remember this picture.
Yeah. And then just had my mind blown by that beer because it had what I loved about Russian River's Temptation, but you could tell it was like this extra level of complexity. So I could have easily said Temptation is a beer that changed my life. This was just like a whole nother level of craziness and thought that goes into this beer, only releasing it once every 3 years. So
were you aware of lambic and goose and that whole tradition that they were emulating at the time, or did that come after you'd had Duck Duck Goose?
I probably before I got the beer, but after I learned what it was, I had to learn why it was called Gooze and what that riff was on. So probably somewhere in the time between I learned of the beer and when I actually got it, I figured out, oh, okay, that's the word for
awesome.
Belgian lambic, goose, etc. So
I feel like that's an atypical order, but I love that.
Yeah. So Lost Abbey has, of course, become a favorite brewery of mine. And that's like the only beer club I'm in. I think I've been in their club since they started it, which I don't know, I want to say it was like 2018. So probably 5 or so years I've been in their club. So I brought with me not just a bottle of Duck Duck Goose, but this year was their 5th anniversary of it. So they've released it in 2009, 2013, 2016, 2019, and 2022. In addition to the 2022 blend, they still had some barrels from the 2019 that were yet to come out of barrels, and some from 2016. So they made this blend called the 5 vintage anniversary blend.
Amazing.
That is like 55% the new blend, but then like 30% 2019, and I think 15% from 2016.
Jeez.
So that's what we're going to crack open here maybe when we take a break.
Awesome. Do you want to take a break now so we can crack those open?
Yes.
Yeah, let's take a quick break. Welcome back to the Beer Temple Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Shalau, Viz Was Brewing. I'm sitting here with Doug Veliky, who is treating me to a beer that changed his life. It is Duck Duck Goose. Doug, should we talk a little bit about what's in the glass?
Sure.
What we're smelling and tasting?
Yeah, so this is the anniversary blend of Duck Duck Goose, done for the fifth vintage of this. So they did it in 2009, 2013, 16, 19, and 22. And then alongside their 22 release this year, they did this anniversary blend that is 55% barrels from the current blend, 30% from the 2019 blend, and then 15% from 2016. So we're drinking combinations of barrels from, I believe,
like
9 different batches of Duck Duck Goose.
It's wild. Like that's like what, 7 years? Is that like or probably 6 when they blended it? Like that's crazy. Like that that is, and it tastes great.
It does.
Yeah, it's not some gimmick that they're like, oh, we had some old stuff and we're gonna charge you more for it. It tastes and unique and beautiful, right? We remarked on how it was very funky and a little stinky in like the most beautiful way possible when you popped it, which we had to open the door to let a little bit of its excitement not get on Chris's beautiful floors back here. But how do you feel about it? What's it doing for you? How's it taste?
It's remarkable to me because, when people ask, I get asked a lot of people want to know how long they should age beers. And I usually tell them, like, you shouldn't.
Don't.
That's the best response is don't.
For pretty much anything.
The exception for me is like a Drie Fontenaine or a Cantillon Lambic. If you want to age those, go nuts. It'll taste wonderful in 15 years. It'll be different
to a certain extent. Yeah, there are limits on that
fun
as well.
Yes.
I remember, not to interrupt this, but a quick sidebar. At the first Shelton Brothers Festival, I happened to be standing at a table that Jean Van Roy was at when someone walked up with a 1973 goose for him to drink from his own brewery, and he took one sip. He's like, "Oh, it's terrible. It tastes like vinegar." So don't wait like 40 years, but 15 you'll probably be all right.
Yeah, 10 is like a magical, very hard to do because it's hard to be that patient.
Yeah.
That's for people who like buy a case.
You kind of have to like forget about it.
Yeah, you really do. But this one, let me back up. So I love this beer because, I tell people with American sours, I tend to put my recommendation. It doesn't mean it won't still taste okay beyond this, but like 3 years is generally my cap of when I want to have these drank by. A lot of times these taste a little bit young right out of the gate, still very delicious, but lacking a little bit in complexity that very quickly when you sit on it for a year, it really gets there. Mm-hmm. And then 2 years, to me, it's getting more and more interesting. And then by 3 years, it's like teetering on the peak of it's probably not going to get any better than this. It might be going slightly downhill. This is when I want to have this drank by. And it's hard to resist not aging some of these because it's fun to, when the next one comes out, do a side-by-side. And I'm not saying I keep to all these rules, but in general, if I was giving someone advice, that's what I would tell them. I'd like a Russian River Sour, drink it within 3 years. If you want to drink it longer, have at it.
Yeah. But then also understand you're drinking something different, right?
Very.
And I think most people who are doing this know this, but there was a time in beer where it's like, just understand this isn't the same beer that they put in the bottle, especially these ones that still have like living yeast cultures in them. Stouts also for different reasons, but people would drink like, I remember when I was doing barrel aged beers at Pipeworks, people would drink, 3, 4, 5-year-old versions of some Pipeworks beers and be like, it's not as good as it was like 2 or 3 years ago. It's like, well, yeah, man, it was in the barrel for like 2 years, and then we didn't have the best equipment at the old place. Like, just drink it when it came out. I understand why people did it, and just know you're drinking something different.
Totally. But yeah, I can't think of too many American sours that, trigger as much Belgian goose. Sensors going off in my head as this one. The other ones I could think of that I'd put in the general ballpark would be like Allagash, Coolship, Resurgam. Resurgam, there you go.
I like your version better, though. It sounds like a great level in a video game.
Yeah, it's like you Surge. Maybe I was looking at Surge as I said it. So that's what I said. Jester King Spawn is another good one, but this one to me is my favorite. I think it always will be. But and then this one with like 9 different years of barrels into this by combining 3 vintages of Duck Duck Goose. Like, I would have expected this one to look darker, have more of the like tannin quality.
Right. There's no obvious oxidative character to it that I can discern at all. It is very obviously tannic on the finish, which is awesome, but it's not specifically oaky. You know what I mean? You get that like that grippiness, but it's not. Doesn't come with like the vanillin or the spice of an American or a French or Hungarian oak. It just is that structure.
Yeah.
Which I think serves this beer incredibly well because it's tart, but it's not like overly acidic, and that tannin comes in and just grabs, and it's really cool. Dries it out a bunch.
Did you buy that I knew what you meant by Hungarian oak?
I mean, like American and French oak, right? Hungarian oak's essentially it's very similar to French oak.
Okay.
Red oak varietals. There are like We can go. You want to do 20 minutes on different oak grains?
Not especially. Serge does.
Yeah, Serge loves different.
Maybe for the Patreon afterwards.
American oak is very special, people. Yeah, well, thank you for bringing this. It's really wonderful.
My pleasure. So this beer, like, kind of is what got me into specialty beer. This was the first rare beer I have. I think I did a good job of, I had to stare at it for at least a few months, but I didn't stare at it for a few years. I think I opened it within maybe 3 months, and I was like, well, I got to have this. So, but this is what led me to being fascinated by the special releases that are often not what a brewery's bread and butter is, but it's their kind of annual showcase of something extra special, something that takes a lot of more time and thought to create. So this was like kind of my entryway into that. And, it has something to do with my like involvement in doing that on like Revolution side now, dealing with the barrel program. Not that I have anything to do with the brewing or the barrel aging, but like what I do around the brand around it, kind of all my interest and excitement over that came from Duck Duck Goose for sure.
Yeah, so how do you translate something like that from the time you have this into now that you can actually, this is some sort of actionable thing you can do, right? You work at a brewery that makes some of the best spirit barrel-aged beers in the world. And how do you take lessons from the way they release these or the way that you interacted with them and try to bring some sort of positive experience to the consumer for the very special beers you guys are making at Rev?
Well, they had one of the most disastrous online sales in history, and we had a disastrous online sale today. So we definitely
good day to get you in here then. People are mad. They're texting me. No, I'm just
kidding. Duck Duck Goose taught me how to have something go wrong with the website. No, I'm just kidding.
And you're going to tell people it's like you're staring down a batter, like Tommy Arthur did one time.
I think I've. Not to go Rob Todd on you with
my favorite
Don, but I have over the years I've talked about Lost Abbey so much that it has led to me being able to converse with Tommy Arthur, and he's become a friend of mine, and so I've gotten to ask him a lot of my like most beer nerdy questions of why don't you ever do this? And I've gotten answers from him, and I've asked him like, couldn't you time this? Couldn't you brew it so that you're always releasing Duck Duck Goose, a 3-year blend, but you could do it every year? And how he would never want to do that because he wants people to miss it and have that excitement for it coming back, and 1 year would lose its luster. I asked him like, when are you going to do Duck Duck Goose Framboise and Duck Duck Goose Creek? I wish I remembered. He didn't give me a specific answer to it, but he said he will never do that. It will always just be Duck Duck Goose.
Because they have made cherry and raspberry beers in that program, right? They're just not. They're not. Are they not 3-year blends? They're just like
correct.
Yeah,
and those will always stay, according to him, over to the side under a different brand. He wants it to just be Duck Duck Goose. He does not want like a raspberry version. He just wants it to be it. And he's gone a long way sticking to those guns. And I feel like if he hasn't done it at this point, he's probably not going to do it.
He's a man with specific desires that he usually acts upon, right?
So there's patience there that I've learned from it of like not, I'm sure in an off year you could use the sales and excitement from a beer that is known nationwide. We've thankfully created our own version of that, but in the barley wine world with VSOJ, and that's something we're very patient about. We could release that every year and it would probably sell out at least, but we want to make room for other projects and not just be the VSOJ brewery. We want to do other things, and people have to wait. And
you would kill Alex Kidd. He would die.
So off the top of my head, those are a couple examples of how. But just like being a super consumer, it's interesting being at a brewery in a position that I've developed into, but also still to this day, but especially in these earlier days, like being a beer nerd too, and being deep in the Facebook metaverse of all the beer releases, the beer traders, and following how those people think, and knowing, you always think you have all your ducks in a row, no pun intended, for running a release, and that paying attention to those super consumers helps.
Yeah.
But like I said today, there's always something that can go wrong.
You do seem to have a very accurate, if not humorous, insight into the mind of the super consumer and or beer flipper or trader.
Yeah.
Would you like to talk about TikTok a little bit?
Sure.
Is that a cool is that a good transition for you?
Yeah.
All right. Well, you have an insane amount of likes and views on TikTok, and it's something that I am I've not really engaged with either personally or as a business. What was it like starting out from zero on TikTok? And because you grew a relatively big huge Instagram following, and then you jumped to TikTok.
Yeah, at the same time, my Instagram account felt like it couldn't go anywhere else. Like I felt like I had grown it, but the platform started feeling very stagnant. Like at the end of the last decade, call it 2018, 19, something like that. I was like, man, this is getting kind of boring on here. Like I feel like I'm getting boring. Maybe I was just like not sure what people wanted to hear, and I didn't know what to say, and I wasn't saying anything interesting.
It was pretty refining in your ability to post. Like they've added features for sure, but they're not the same.
So when I learned that led me to like wanting to read about how these the lifespan of a social media platform, how these work, and it's interesting when you learn about them and you see how like a trajectory that a social medium goes through, where the first stage is growth mode. And these companies care zero about making money. They just want users. They want people on them. Mm-hmm. They want people to grow their following so that they are motivated to make content.
So they're pushing you out. Yeah. They're helping you.
So you have this number of years where the medium is growing, and then all of a sudden they get to a point where their investors, their stakeholders say, okay, it's time to make some money.
Right.
And then everything changes. And it doesn't change immediately. There's an immediate change, but it still feels somewhat, but it just slowly kind of loses its soul.
Right.
And that's what happened to Facebook. And then a couple years delayed, that's what's been happening to Instagram. And it's becoming young kids aren't signing up for it. And so the platform gets older and older. Ad revenue for them becomes more and more of a priority. They begin losing users and they go elsewhere. So I learned about TikTok in 2019, probably about, 6 or 9 months before COVID started. So I got a little bit of a head start of just knowing it existed, figuring out what it was, what was unique about it, why content in there was different than like a video on Instagram. Figured out pretty quickly that it was very much less so prioritized curation. And it wasn't about having this glamorous feed where every post used the same filter, the same editing strokes. And it was more about like what you had to say, what you saying, feeling like genuine, like you didn't rehearse this. People just wanted to hear from authentic voices, especially someone who could teach you something or entertain you. That's all about those. It always comes down to those two things. Are you entertaining me or are you informing me about something? And then the magic synergy when you have the ability to do both. Make someone laugh and teach them something at the same time. So that was very fascinating to me. I've always been into stand-up comedy as like if I did, it's something I'm too risk averse to ever have pursued, but I love the art of stand-up comedy. Mm-hmm. So like whenever I see a documentary on Netflix, I'm like immediately firing that up. My wife and I go to a couple stand-up comedians every year. We went to one.
To Mulaney recently,
we went to Mulaney on Saturday. It was awesome. So like we're both, we figured that out about each other. We love going to comedy shows and been doing it forever. Nice. So like the art of comedy is fascinating to me. I'm by no means a comedian, but I love the ability I'm fascinated by the art of making people laugh. It's challenging, and it's challenging to do over and over again. So that's a fun challenge. That's just like a kind of hobby itch that I like to work into what I do whenever I can. And I saw on TikTok that this was, this medium was very much like, it was heavy for comedians, like, or people trying to become one, doing skits with themselves. This quickly got into COVID where all bets were off. And so everybody had all the time in the world. People were going heavy into TikTok and making some of the most hilarious videos I've ever seen. And the whole time I'm doing this, I'm like, there's nothing, literally zero happening around beer, craft beer, anything on here. And I didn't know, I knew from that point that I wanted to do it. I knew I was like, all right, I've been doing this for, what was it at the time, 7 or 8 years on Instagram. I gotta get over here as like a backup plan, because I was like, I think Instagram's just gonna die. I think this thing I spent almost a decade building, I think it's going to become kind of worthless pretty soon. And I hate to just leave it there. But in this, like, there's this going to be this stream of years that's like can be an overlap between Instagram and TikTok and whatever else comes next. I was like, I think I'd be stupid to not be building a backup plan for what I've created where I can still get people over to this other one. So I also kind of wanted to reinvent what I was doing. I thought what I was doing on Instagram was not interesting at all. Then I didn't know what I was doing. I was just randomly, whatever came to my mind that day, I would post about. But TikTok, I quickly realized that people were hungry for educational information about beer, about the beer industry, about tasting beer, about how to pour a beer, how the industry works, the business side, anything you wanted to talk about. If you could demonstrate that you had experience in this area, you had a massive audience that nobody was talking to. So I started I just didn't have much time. It was like trying to get the brewery through COVID. That was like number one priority, but I did have this extra time from not going anywhere, doing nothing socially for a good year plus, where I would just sit there flicking on my phone. Instead of watching Netflix, I was just watching a lot of TikTok videos on a small phone, trying to figure out what this app was all about and how people communicate there, because it is different. It's not easy.
Right.
You'll never, I think TikTok is really fun and awesome. You'll never hear me say it's easy. It takes a little bit to learn, but once you figure it out, it becomes easier. So I started like dabbling on it, just like throwing up maybe like a video a week, nothing too crazy, just trying to test out things. And you could tell it was getting a little bit of momentum. People, 5-10 people any posts would find it and start following me. And then as soon as you get a little bit of traction, that motivates you to do another, just like Instagram posts 8 years before that when I was telling that story. Same thing was happening on TikTok. Okay, people are responding when I teach them something. They're like, thanks so much. I always wondered how that works. This makes total sense. Really appreciate you taking the time to make that video. And I'm like,
that's awesome.
Oh, cool. Well, if you like that, I got another one. Here's why pumpkin beers are coming out in July. And then do another one on that. And then just like kept doing it and then trying to figure out ways to make it not just the same thing every day, having like many different shticks to do. And then again, like leaning on the comedy, leaning on, hey, here's some things I'm doing at my job that you might find interesting. Here's kind of some behind the scenes brewery. Here's just beers that I'm really into. Here's breweries that inspired me. So I trying to find like 8 types of content that are fun for me to make. It doesn't feel like work, because that's what's most important to doing this. You've got to find things that you get excited by the idea. I don't dread making it. I don't go, oh, I have to make another TikTok video. I go, ooh, this is fun, because I love editing.
You can tell.
I love editing videos. I love editing pictures. It's just like soothing to me. Some people like playing the guitar, playing the piano, like editing things is like what makes time stand still for me.
Nice.
So it's fun. And it's really the way people respond on there. Like if I post a video on TikTok and post the same video on Instagram and it's like an educational one, it'll get 6 or 8 comments on Instagram. It could get 300 on TikTok.
And what's the tone difference? Like that was something I wanted to ask you. Like, what's the tone difference of those comments on Instagram versus TikTok? Like,
well, with Instagram, I have such a long history with most of the people that are active on my feed that I think people have known me there so long that they're less excited to go back and forth with me because they have for years, and it's just like less interesting. I think a lot of these people on TikTok are new and hungrier, whereas Instagram, there's kind of like, feels like there's a burnout from using that medium that way as a way to interact with people. Sure, it's still happening. It's just happening less than it used to. Whereas TikTok, there's just like revitalized energy and going back and forth with the person that made the video.
Do you think it's a younger crowd, or they have less history with you personally or as an account, or a combination of the two?
I think those two, and a stigma of the site. I think there's like more energy on the site in general. So it could be some people. I think there are people that have been on Instagram forever and just like stopped commenting on stuff there, but are now on TikTok and are commenting there, feel like a different level of comfort there. Feel like, hey, there's like reborn. A lot of conversation happening here. It's kind of dead over here. So I don't know. Got it. Still figuring it out very much. So.
Yeah, sure. Being that you're figuring it out, what are some of the biggest things for breweries that are afraid of TikTok, or people who are into beer that are afraid of TikTok, to know when they're getting into it? Because I assume most people that listen to this podcast are people who work at breweries. Yeah. So do you have advice for people that are either just dipping their toe, have yet to dip their toe, or?
Totally. I don't think every brewery should get on TikTok. I think if a brewery has an employee who they're willing to give them the time, the couple hours in the week it would take to make 5 or so TikToks to tell their customers cool things going on. If they have an employee who's knowledgeable about things that are going on and is a user of TikTok, is a believer of TikTok themselves, and likes the idea of taking on the challenge of running the brewery's TikTok because they know how to connect the dots between production, marketing, what's going on in the tap room, depending on what, every brewery has different dynamics. If they have someone that is a user of it, gets it, has some ideas for an angle of how to position the brewery's TikTok, and again, that doesn't feel like work to them, that's exciting, then I think they should do it. But there's probably breweries out there with 10 to 20 people, none of them use TikTok. I'm not going to tell them, dude, you got to get on TikTok, because I know they'll fall on their face. They're going to go on, they're not going to know what to do, because they're not going to, like I said, I spent a good year mostly being entertained or informed by it, not posting, figuring it out, thinking about what would I do if I was running an account. But if I had never been on the site, and I would never go, if someone had never been on it before, I would not tell you got to download it and start posting, because I know what they post will not be good and it will not be good for them. So I wouldn't tell them to do. So it's got to be a right fit there. But a lot of people are getting on it. So that's depending on what brewery we're talking about and how many employees they have. You could let a brewer, if you had a brewer there are brewers who are very creative on social media. You could let a brewer do it. You could let your taproom manager do it. You could let someone on your marketing team do it. But again, if you just have a marketing team of 2 and they both hate TikTok, don't tell your marketing team to run a TikTok, because it will suck.
So it seems that it is a platform in which authenticity is more important than any other social media platform, is what it sounds like.
100%.
And enthusiasm and authentic enthusiasm.
Yeah, if I put some produced, very staged video on, it would go nowhere. Yeah. People want to feel like they're being leveled with. Nice.
Yeah. Good to know. I remember after one show we had here, I was like, I got to get on TikTok. And I just didn't end up, I'm an old now, I feel like, so I'm not, but I just don't. Also, there's only one person at my brewery, and he doesn't use TikTok. So
I need to write these down, because I could probably give breweries. I should make a blog post out of this. I could give them 30 quick, easy tips. One that's huge is that I've learned about, and I never had to think about with Instagram, and this has changed the way I write as well. Is the concept of the hook. And the hook is pretty much the first 3, maybe 5, but really 3 seconds of the video. What you say there is so important. A TikTok should never start off with me going to our brewmaster and him saying, "Hi, everybody. My name is Jim Seaback." Because people are immediately going to go, next video.
You're selling me something.
But if he goes right into a cold IPA is when... And then people will say, okay, I'm going to stick around. I got to see what, because then you just use text to write in the corner, Jim Seaback, Revolution Brewing, Brewmaster. You don't need to spend the 3 seconds of him saying that. Just write it on the screen, get to the point, hook them into the video, because that's what's going to determine how many people decide to continue watching it and how many more people the algorithm shows it to you. Because if they see everybody staying well into the video, they're going to say, okay, this must be a good piece of content. We're just going to keep, if they use the hashtag craft beer, we're going to show it to 5,000 more people. And that's how you grow your following. They are so much better than Instagram at saying, okay, this person is making content that people are getting through, and it's clearly about this interest. So we've identified all these other people who like videos with that interest. They might like this too. We're going to show it to them. Those people start following you. Instagram sucks at that. Mm-hmm. If I post on there, the people seeing my stuff are the people that follow me. If I post on TikTok, 60% of the people seeing my video don't follow me and might become a new follower, and that's why it's growing.
Do you think that's native to the way that platform will operate, or is that because they're in growth mode and that people that want to get into it should get into it sooner so that they build that following?
I think it's a healthy combination of both. It definitely in growth mode makes it easier, but I do think their algorithm is much, much better. It's proven that you can just look at who liked a post of yours, and it shows you next to their name whether they follow you or not. And you can see that half the people that liked it don't even follow you. So you just know that it's showing it to random people.
That's great.
So
That's awesome.
Yeah.
What's the future of social media then, Doug? What's the next TikTok? I'm just.
I got asked that the first time a couple weeks ago, having no rehearsed answer. And I do think the next thing after TikTok, I don't think it exists yet, or it exists to the point that it has a big user base. I think the next thing that would happen, all crypto jokes aside, I think there's a potential for a blockchain-based social media platform where all of the like control would be given to the users, meaning big decisions would be voted on by the users, and it would be like super democratic of everything, the direction the platform goes. They would figure out a way to democratize that. There's a concept called a DAO. So with crypto, there's cryptocurrency.
DAW? D-A-W?
Yeah, decentralized autonomous organization is what it stands for. So in the blockchain world, there's three primary uses of blockchain. There's cryptocurrency, there's NFTs, and then there's DAOs. And a DAO is a way to basically like program the governance of a company. Like if this happens, this must happen, and everything is like mapped out so that everything happens in a voting sense. It's not some executive gets to just say, nah, we're just doing this because that's what I want to do.
Now we make money.
Everything has to happen systematically. And a lot of people think that that's going to be, I'm not saying the future, it's going to be a future. So there could be a way to, and this could be like 10 years away. I'm not saying this is going to pop up in a year or two. But I think that could be like the next big thing way down the road of how social media evolves, is giving the power to the users because of all the backlash Facebook gets, all the backlash TikTok gets for being, supposedly the Chinese government is spying on us.
But the American government is spying on you and use TikTok and use Facebook and Instagram.
Yeah, exactly. So the natural evolution of that to me, and if cryptocurrency succeeds and NFTs succeed someday, it seems like social media would probably be run the same way where the users have the power and there is no Mark Zuckerberg pulling the strings.
Okay, so now that we're in this space, and you, by no means am I saying you're an expert at this and you don't have to claim it, but you know more about this than almost anyone I know. Where do you see a space for NFTs in breweries? Because right now they seem like such novelty. Like you buy this picture and then you get the blockchain code. And so what is a real genuine use that a brewery could deploy for that technology?
Sure. Have you ever used an Apple Wallet?
Yeah.
Have you ever used it for like sporting events where you have tickets? Have you ever looked back in it and been able to look at your and like just flick through old ones? So that it's kind of neat that those are there. And I think the way NFTs.
I mean, I collect the physical tickets, so I keep all the
right, but those are kind of a thing of the past.
Gone, yeah.
You're not going to get too many more of those these days.
Right, but I'd say that's transferred into my wallet.
Yeah. So if we take that Apple Wallet concept and think about, let's just say Apple Wallet becomes like an NFT wallet. So same idea. But I think in the future, just like your social media feed, think of like a MySpace page back in the day, your Facebook page that you could decorate in different ways. You have your cover, you have your banner picture that you get to give one vibe of yourself. Then you have the circle picture. It's another one. That's like you kind of like pimping out your page, decorating it the way to make it you. I think people's digital wallet, the stuff that you want to make public, like almost like badges, will become a thing. So an NFT could be one of those. And let me give you a beer example. I'm not trying to do this. This is just an example I've used.
I'm not saying, what's Rev going to do with NFTs?
But I will use Rev just because it's the brand I oversee of something that I think is a fair example. So every year we sponsor C2E2, which is the Comic-Con of Chicago. We use that as a like big celebration of our IPAs, which all have hero in them. We go big on the art and get creative with those and make our own superhero universe. Ties really well to one of our biggest sponsorships, which is C2E2. So all year long, we're coming out with different hero beers. What if when people came to our tap room and bought a hero from us, they pulled out their wallet, which has a QR code. We have a little scanner. By scanning it, they get an NFT of the artwork of that hero. Now that doesn't mean anything at the time, but we now have the ability to see the address of every wallet we gave the Galaxy Hero NFT to.
Not people's home address, right? Like the digital address.
The digital address of the wallet. So then what if like the month before C2E2, and we could tell people about this ahead of time, but we said anybody who collected all 8 of the NFTs of the 8 hero releases, we're going to give you 2 free passes to go to C2E2. And that's pretty cool because as part of our sponsorship, we get a bunch of tickets that we're giving away to friends, partners of ours. And we could easily set 100 of those aside and say, you know, if we just whatever we estimate will be the number of people that would actually collect and come buy all the heroes. So we could introduce like a collectability aspect to it with a reward. Now you might say, but Doug, do you really need a NFT? Do you need a digital wallet to do this? No, you could use a punch card. You could use, but the idea is the whole like, there's going to be ways you display these things. And if you're a proud Revolution customer and you like the hero art, you might want to display these somewhere where you can only display legit ones. And it could be this crazy as it sounds. I'm not a big metaverse person, but I do think it's going to be a thing where you might, we could get into that if you want to, like an example of how that could be fun. But there's going to be different ways where you can show off your badges and artwork and stuff. And I think that could be, that's the rebuttal to, couldn't you do this with something else? Yes, you could. I think people are going to want all these things together because with NFTs, the idea is no matter who's doing this, your favorite brewery, your favorite coffee shop, Nike, Coke, they can all go in this same wallet. Where this whatever punch card or whatever we would do through our POS system, that's all decent. That's all over the place. There's no way to show off your whole collection of everything you're into, everything you support, your beer ones, your coffee ones, your dark matter, NFTs, you know, stuff like that. So this is all far out there. This isn't stuff I'm like, I really want to be on podiums preaching about this is the future. But this is just me saying, I could see that. You know, that makes sense to me. When? I don't know. I don't know.
Well, but no one's asking you to know. You're in an industry with a bunch of dummies who get grain wet for a living. So like the fact that you know anything about this makes you.
So I just like the whole thing with like, I like to be early on things. Like I'll admit that. Like I like to be early. I think I was early on TikTok because I'm not a naysayer. I'm like, I see the winds changing. I see them early and I see something that's still healthy but starting to fade. And I always ask myself, what's creeping up? What's the small thing that's about to become big? And so I look for it. I looked for what TikTok is and didn't take long to find it. Okay, this is the thing. This is the one thing out there that's picking up momentum, not losing it. Same thing with NFTs. Like I just like paid attention to it. I do not own a single one. I never have owned one. So I'm not like this gigantic proponent of it, but I've learned about like what they can do that makes them unique from what we can do now. And it's fascinating and it just all makes sense to me. And I love the Apple Wallet example because that's the thing we're using today a little bit that we really like. Anybody who uses it, anybody who gets their tickets to a sporting event, aside from missing the physical ticket as a souvenir, the convenience of it is really cool. And you're like, oh, this is neat. So if you think about it, like, aren't so many more things going to start to be more like that? It's hard to ignore.
Yeah, I mean, it's not. Honestly, the idea of that is not very new, right? When I was going to college for performing arts management. I was going to work in the music industry, and there's this guy named Bob Lefsetz who wrote about music industry stuff. And in 2008 or 9, he was writing about like a way we can get people to come back to live music or to buy physical CDs is to create tokens. And he didn't, or badges is the way that he was looking at them. But these things weren't, I don't even know if the technology was really that robust for him to even know about it. But just knowing the incentivization of collecting these things and being able to display them to people that are like-minded or that there's immense power in that. Yeah. So, I mean, and ever more as technology advances, being early to something is only advantageous, right? Like there's no advantage to not being on something. Yeah. I mean, unless you spend a bunch of money to get into something, but like signing up for a TikTok or whatever the next thing is, or getting into NFT while it's cheap, like or collecting one for your hero series, like, or there's no downside to any of that.
Yeah, and you don't even have to get on these again. It's just like educate yourself a little bit before you dismiss. Instead of you can dismiss it, and then you're going to be behind someday.
Right.
It just doesn't mean you have to buy an NFT.
Right.
Just learn a little bit more about it. Find somebody who's a little more level-headed, reasonable, down the middle.
Right.
and just pay attention. It's just that's my recommendation.
And like, just because you have examples of things that failed, like you want to be on the one that works, and the only way to do that is to be early on a lot of them. Yeah. Can we talk a little bit about the fundraising you've done for Early Children's Hospital?
Sure.
So I'm honored to have been part of it, but can you tell the people a little bit about what you were doing and why you were, if you're comfortable with it, why you were raising money for them?
Sure. And my son, who is now almost 7, he was born in 2015, and in our first ultrasound with him, we learned he had the lower left lobe of his lungs was not functioning, and so they were able to see that way before he was born. And then we went into his birth, it being high risk, had to have a SWAT team ready to go in case he wasn't breathing. They might have had to perform a surgery instantly. Thankfully, that wasn't the case, and he was breathing just fine and was a normal kid, except, about 30% of his lung capacity was just non-existent. There was just like non-functioning tissue there where part of your lung would normally be. So kind of continued meeting with surgeons there, and they all told us the same thing, which was that if you do this at a young age, the lung above it grows right back. So we had this surgery at 7 months. We needed him to get to a certain age where he was strong enough to handle the surgery, but young enough where it just regenerates. So we had this done. Couldn't have gone better. Within 2 weeks, he had a full set of lungs because the lobe above it just grows and fills in the space.
Amazing.
And it got to the point where it was like, yeah, you don't even need to have appointments with us ever again. Like, everything is normal. He's a normal kid. He might not want to play for the Denver Broncos if he's in the NFL because of the altitude, but that's about it. So it was great. So we was like, felt this like debt of gratitude to the hospital, and I was just like always wanted to have kind of our own fundraising initiatives, and just never knew where to begin or what cause to get behind. There's so many causes that need it. And then an intern at Revolution one summer came up to me at his internship had ended. I had never met him because he was in sales. He was out on the road the whole time. He came up to me at our Oktoberfest and told me about his story, that his name was Mitchell. Is Mitchell, and he had 46 MRIs at Lurie Children's Hospital and had multiple brain surgeries, and had just had a brain surgery like a few weeks before that day. And he told me about this project he was fundraising for, where in the MRI rooms that he had to go into all the time as a kid, they were very sterile, just white walls, and how intimidating that was as a kid, going into this tube where you have to lay still for often more than an hour at a time. And because a little kid can't lay still, they often have to sedate you, which adds risk to it, and is really rough on the parents when that happens to your kid. Whereas they had come up with this concept of like transforming the rooms with artwork from the floors, the actual machine you go into, and the walls, creating a scene around it. And all that is very expensive. It's like $10,000 to do that. And he had raised, all but I think like $700, and he just didn't know. He had like exhausted all his resources, and he came up, introduced himself to me, and said, is there anything you could think of how I could raise the rest of this goal? So I, of course, talked to Revolution's owner, and that he hit the goal the next day.
Yeah.
And he was like so thankful, and invited the Lurie team to the brew pub and asked if we could all have lunch together. And I was like, sure. I feel like I did nothing. I just I made a donation myself, and then our owner kicked in the rest, and we were done. And I was like, I'm so glad for you that you did this. Is incredible. You got this room done. We talked to the hospital, and they told us that was at an outpatient facility, and they were renovating their whole MRI suite at Lurie Children's at the main hospital downtown, and they wanted to do the same thing but with 4 more rooms. So I said, I'd love to take on one of those rooms if that's okay. I'll raise $10,000, I think, through some friends and family and just maybe some beer contacts. We could put something together. So I put it out there on my Instagram feed. This was, I think, 2019 that we started this, and with the goal of doing one of these 4 rooms and kind of sponsoring a quarter of the project. And long story short, within a few days, the outpouring, the response was we were doing all 4 rooms. Melanie from the Green Lady, who I know has come on the show many times, I think I've been on her before, she was the first like business to reach out and say, I would love to be a big part of this. Could we hold a big event and I'll donate everything to that? And I was like, oh man, we raised 15 of the first $40,000 from one night at the Green Lady. Amazing. From donating all the draft pours, got crazy kegs from tons of breweries locally and out of town as well. And then all these people donated these really cool raffle prizes. Lost Abbey donated a bunch of beers like Duck Duck Goose and others. And just there were like 40 different raffle prizes that were going for hundreds and hundreds of dollars each. $15,000, boom. We were at this $40,000 goal like 2 or 3 months after the whole just like conversation started. And so it was like so exciting. And then it quickly turned into, all right, give us a break. This was like hard to do and work a job and family. Like give us like a couple months to like figure out the next way to do this again and what the next project at the hospital would be. So we kind of kept in touch and we're like, do you have more rooms? And so I'll make this next part. I'll kind of breeze over this quickly. They had a CT scan room. They had a nuclear medicine room. All these other rooms where kids at the hospital are getting these scary tests done. The X-ray rooms. So we've done now 10 rooms at the hospital, and all through craft beer related fundraising, people donating bottles to raffles I do, breweries like yourself donating the ability to do. I do a lot of silent auctions thanks to like as was you were Mike, you were the first person to generously be willing to take on a stranger to collaborate with a beer with you on.
Yeah, it was immediate yes when you asked.
To anyone at a brewery out there, do not underestimate how much somebody's willing to donate to a charity to partner up with you to create a beer that you still get to sell, but they just want to be part of that process, learn about beer on the commercial side, be part of the, just on the emails where the art development happens. Like if you can let them in on that, that's really valuable to people. And if they can donate it to a charity, you can do some pretty cool things with that. And Mike, you laid the groundwork for that, showed that it could be done, and that you might even develop a new friend out of it as well.
Yeah, I mean,
think you did.
Yeah, Pat Craddock from Griffin Claw was the person who actually was the high bidder for making a beer with us, which was hilarious because he works at a brewery and he still wanted to make a weird little saison with us. And we actually made a version of one of his homebrew recipes that featured Piloncillo sugar. And then we had a release event for it at Green Lady, and we donated I think almost, I'm not an accountant, but almost all the profits we made from that went into the fund as well.
Extremely generous.
But then I became friends with Pat, and we've brewed a beer at Griffin Claw, and my girlfriend's actually from Detroit, which is right around where their brewery's from. So now every time I go back there, it's a business expense to go see old Pat.
Yeah, now you got a beer friend.
Yeah. But yeah, I just think it's really incredible how you were able to take all of these things that we've been talking about that you've been working on for, or just involved in your life for so long, the reach you've created on social media, the station you have at Revolution, and just who you are as a person, and turn it into raising incredible amounts of money, all to make children feel more comfortable when they're going through some of the scariest times in their lives. And
thanks. Yeah,
it was an honor to be part of it. So
it's been awesome. And the best part about it, in addition to, of course, all the generosity of people making it happen through donating beers, bottles, experiences like you have, the best is when people reach out to me and say, I've been meaning to do something like this, and I needed just one last kick in the butt. And seeing you do this, I'm now doing this. Hey, would you mind sharing just once on your Instagram stories just this fundraiser I'm doing with bourbon? And relationships I've created, and so there's that like just being the one last kick in the butt from people seeing me doing it and them going and doing it themselves has been exciting. And then other people saying like, thanks so much for talking about what you went through with your son out in the open, because we had something with our daughter when she was 1, and we kind of bottle it up, and we know we should just be willing to talk about it. And seeing you talk about it and be willing to put yourself out there and not hide from it and not try to like bury those emotions, it really helps us talk about it too. That's exciting too. That not anything we were thinking about as a motivation for this, but just kind of just not being shy about it and just putting yourself out there. That alone can sometimes help people. Just seeing that can help them get over a hump of their own.
Well, I was personally very grateful that there's someone like you who feels and thinks that way, has such a big station, and chooses to employ it. Well, Doug, is there anything we didn't talk about that you'd like to discuss or talk about, or a facet of your life that we didn't delve into?
Oh man, probably.
That you'd like to discuss with me?
No, I mean, I think this was awesome.
Yeah.
So thanks for the time. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about?
No, I think I appreciate what you do, who you are, and that we get to be friends.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much.
Appreciate it, Mike.
Remember this is what we wanted. Remember this is what we said. To never be heard or seen from again.